Well, hey again, everybody. Welcome back. It's Friday. Yay! Which means I should be back real soon. So, today I'll try and keep it brief, but we have 3 poems to discuss, and they're not all that easy. The first one is called A Study of Reading Habits by Philip Larkin. That one I think is fairly straightforward, and we'll break it down as we go. The next one is called Mirror by Sylvia Plath. And that one's pretty tricky. Sylvia Plath was an interesting person, and I think this is, well, I see this as a somewhat autobiographical poem. So let's take a look at that as well. The last one is My Team Ploughing by A.E. Housman, which is essentially a back and forth between a dead man and a friend who seems to have taken his place in life. So let's start with A Study of Reading Habits by Philip Larkin. All right, so how do we interpret this poem? First of all, the title, super important. It's called A Study of Reading Habits. So we have a poem here that is theoretically about the reading habits of a certain individual. This is when it becomes really important that you distinguish between the writer and the persona. I don't think any person, especially someone like Philip Larkin, who makes a living from writing poems, for example, would have this kind of experience. Therefore, I think he's adopting a persona, maybe somebody he met somewhere who was disparaging reading, and he wrote through the perspective or the perceived perspective of this person. Just my take. So let's take a look at that first stanza. And it begins, when getting my nose in a book cured most things short of school, it was worth ruining my eyes to know I could still keep cool. In other words, it looks as though he's using books as an escape, keeping his nose in books, curing most things short of school. He uses reading as an escape. Can't get out of school, but he still uses it as an escape. He ends up ruining his eyes, he says, to know he could still keep cool, which is an interesting phrase, and deal out the old right hook, another phrase, dirty dogs twice my size. All these words used in that first stanza signify to me the kind of pulp novels that, or maybe just like comic books, action comics, superheroes, people who, can, well, deal out the old right hook, dirty dogs. I mean, it's like a detective or Batman or something. So I'm getting the feeling that stanza 1 represents his youth, early youth, when he was reading, action, crime, superhero type pulp comics. So not exactly literature. But for him at that time, that was a perfect escape. Okay, to embody people who were powerful when he clearly wasn't. Moving on to the second stanza, the first clue is the word later. Answer your question should be how much later. Based on the sexual content, I'm going to say he's a teenager. Sorry. He's probably not a very popular teenager. I get the feeling that he's still hiding in his books, and his experiences with sex then are not, well, they're not normal human interactions. These are the sexual dealings of somebody who is still finding his outlets through pulp literature. So later, inch-thick specks. Okay, so he's continued to read. His eyesight has gotten worse. Evil was just my lark. Now, lark is a British term meaning kind of a light-hearted joke, jest, game, prank, maybe. But it's also possibly a reference to his own name, Larkin. Me and my coat and fangs had ripping times in the dark. I'm starting to think he's reading these, vampire books. Again, comics, pulp, not exactly literature. Me and my coat and fangs, ripping at times in the dark. The women I clubbed with sex, I broke them up like meringues. This is a violent perspective, and I'm starting to get the feeling pretty clearly that his personal interactions with women are probably non-existent. So he's experiencing a distorted sexual identity as a result of reading, well, just crappy novels dealing with disturbing sexual encounters. Okay, remember, go back to the title. This is a study of reading habits. So So far, so good, huh? Third stanza. Don't read much now. All right, now. Now is an important word in that third stanza. We've got three paths here going through life. Youth, teenage, and now young adult, middle age, I don't know. He says here, don't read much now. The dude who lets the girl down before the hero arrives. The chap who's yellow and keeps the store seem far too familiar. Well, this is sad because now he's identifying with secondary characters. This is his life, and he's identifying with the secondary characters. He does not identify with the hero because he's not a hero. He's never left his room. He just reads, and he's not even reading good books. He's hidden in these books for so long that now he identifies only with the guy who lets the girl down before the actual hero arrives, or the chap who's yellow and keeps the store. These are all reminiscent of westerns, as in a dude ranch. The hero, the chap who's yellow and keeps the store might be the guy behind the counter who strikes up a friendship with the girl, but then the hero rides in and he just says, all right, well, good luck, because he's yellow, he's cowardly. And it concludes very sadly. I don't know if sad is really the word, but it's, well, get stewed. Books are a load of crap. That pretty much says it, doesn't it? Get stewed, of course, is English terminology for, or English slang for get drunk. Books are a load of crap. Now, wow. So, what's the message of this particular poem? Why would Philip Larkin, a poet, write a poem in which the final lines are get drunk, books are crap? And I think the first most obvious answer is this is not Philip Larkin's perspective at all. I feel as though this is a critique of people who read for the wrong reason or read the wrong types of books for the wrong reason. I tend to believe from reading this poem and a certain amount of judgment that seems evident that he is criticizing people who have made poor reading choices their whole life, who live vicariously, exclusively vicariously. That is, they don't get out and get in real fights on the playground. They don't meet real girls in class or in the workplace. They don't, they don't do these things. They just read about other people doing them, and not even in a way that literature can expose you to things that are beyond your scope, your predicament. Instead, it's escaping from life and then blaming the method of one's escape. So in this sense, I guess it is a sad poem, because here's somebody who chose poorly, had zero guidance, and later doesn't see that he's the one who's made these poor choices, and instead blames the escapist literature, which is really, well, reading habits. It's a lifestyle more than anything else. So I don't think Philip Larkin here is telling us not to read. In fact, quite the opposite. I think he's saying, go out there, read amazing books, read novels, read literature, learn about the world, but then go out and do it yourself. Do it for real, too. Don't let literature be an escape, a dead end. All right, I'm dreading this one, Mirror by Sylvia Plath. Sylvia Plath was an interesting person. She, you may be familiar with her novel, The Bell Jar. I read The Bell Jar a long time ago. It was an autobiographical novel. It was good, very well written. She was a prolific poet and author. She was a short story writer. She studied at Smith College and Newham College, University of Cambridge. She was given an internship as a writer for Mademoiselle magazine in New York, which was a really big deal. In fact, that's a lot of what The Bell Jar centers on, her experiences there in New York as a big-time writer. But she suffered from pretty severe depression, and she tried to deal with it in a lot of different ways, and it didn't quite work out. She was ultimately admitted into a mental institution where she received the pretty barbaric treatment at the time, shock therapy, all kinds of other stuff. It was not a good experience for her. When she came out, she convinced herself that she could lead a normal life. She tried really hard. She met somebody. She started a family. She gave birth to a son. Um, and then one day she put her head in the oven and turned on the gas and well, committed suicide. She died, and you know, she died leaving behind a husband and child. And she wrote this poem in 1963, which is the same year that she committed suicide. So this is a dark and disturbing insight into the mind of somebody who is extremely troubled, enough so that she would leave her family behind, well, and her own life. So it's called Mirror. Okay. Let me start by saying I don't have an answer for this poem. I have a lot of interpretations and ideas and concepts, and that's fine. But how do you approach a poem like this? Break it down word by word, look for multiple meanings. For this one, I'm feeling a tone. The tone is powerful. It's sadness, isolation, desperation, but it's also detachment. And I think with a poem like this, it's important to really think about that tone for a while and figure out what it is she's trying to communicate. Because sometimes it's not a message so much as a feeling. I think it's important that she chose the title Mirror, because mirror is a reflective surface, and she uses two separate reflective surfaces in here. In fact, she embodies them. She is the reflective surface, a reflective surface that shows people back what they put into it. And it's also, in a sense, a poem in which she reflects upon herself. So it has another meaning there. The first stanza, she embodies an actual literal mirror to a certain extent. And she's trying to, I think, in these first few lines, distinguish between what we want to see and what is actually there in the mirror. And the mirror is portrayed, in this case, she is the mirror, as something that gives nothing but truth, but that truth is not something that people want to see, unmisted by love or dislike. The line, "I am not cruel, only truthful," suggests that the reflection that she gives back to people is often interpreted as cruel, but she wants to distinguish between cruelty and truthfulness. She also refers to the mirror as a four-cornered god, which is, you know, it's something that's powerful. It gives you a fact, something unalterable. You look into that mirror and you see what you see, and that's what it is. It's like a whole new universe, and you're not in control of what comes out of that mirror. Next up, it says, most of the time I meditate on the opposite wall. It's pink with speckles. So here we are back as an actual mirror on the wall, and she's giving us her perspective as a mirror, just staring at the wallpaper, the other side of the hall. She stares at it all day long. And I feel like this might even be a reference to her time in the mental institution, which they undoubtedly had her pretty drugged up, and she probably sat for hours on end staring at the wall, feeling very much like a mirror. In fact, I envision her sitting there just staring into space as people pop in front of her like a mirror, looking into her face and asking her, "How are you doing? How are you doing? Everything okay? Why are you so upset? What's the matter?" And then they leave sad, angry, disappointed, and she feels like, "Hey, I'm not controlling you. I'm just a mirror." I don't know. I'm reading into this quite a bit. The flickering that she says she sees on that wall, to me, if she's a mirror, and she's on the wall, and she's looking at this wallpaper on the other side, and it flickers periodically. I see the flickering, the faces in darkness that separate us, as life. Okay, it's like people walking by, lights changing outside windows, cars coming and going, interrupting that little space, that little area of vision. It's as if real life that's happening to her is just a peripheral flicker, which I think really reinforces that sense of detachment, loneliness, sadness, isolation that I think this poem embodies. Her next reflective surface in stanza 2 is a lake. And she describes a woman bending over her, searching her reaches for what she really is. And this kind of comes back to the idea that people are looking at Sylvia, perhaps, trying to find out who they really are. And that maybe they don't like the responses that they get. In fact, the next line says that she turns to those liars, the candles or the moon. I see her back and reflect it faithfully. Okay, so why are candles or the moon liars? Well, because, I mean, and this goes back to like photography. Lighting is everything. And candles and moon are soft, flattering lights. And when we talk about looking in the mirror and not having any control over what we see, well, this is kind of like cheating. This is why we go on dates at night in moonlight or candlelit dinners, because those soft lights are very forgiving. Try going on a first date under harsh fluorescent light. It takes every little bump and crevice on your face and casts a shadow across it. You look horrid. So she says the candles or the moon are liars, but meanwhile, she, as a reflective surface, reflects her faithfully. And of course, she's rewarded with tears and an agitation of hands. Rewarded here is an interesting word, because it's obviously not what she's looking for, a reward of agitation and tears. But I think she consoles herself by saying, I am emotionless, I am honest above all. I show you the truth whether you want to see it or not. In fact, especially if you don't want to see it. The poem continues, I am important to her, she comes and goes. So as sad as her message may be to this woman, the woman still comes back and looks at herself in this reflective surface. Each morning, it is her face that replaces the darkness. That's a great line. I mean, really, as a lake, she wakes up each morning and the darkness is replaced with this face. And I can't help once again to think back of perhaps Sylvia Plath, sorry, lying in bed, waking up and seeing a nurse or a family member replacing the darkness. The final line, powerful line, in me she has drowned a young girl, and in me an old woman rises toward her day after day like a terrible fish. And no, this is not a poem about an old lady who murders a little girl in a lake. It's about the loss of youth and the sadness that this woman feels looking at the reality of her aging. She compares it to looking like an old terrible fish day after day. Yay, Sylvia Plath. Okay, last up. Is My Team Ploughing by A.E. Houseman. Much more lighthearted. Kind of. It's about a dead guy. Okay. This poem, I think it's important to note right off the bat, if you didn't see already, is a series of 4-line stanzas, tercets, alternating. The first one is in quotation marks, the second is not, and so on and so forth. So what we have here is a discussion or conversation between two people, real or imagined. And so you should be thinking is who's who, whose conversation is this? Are they really having the conversation? Is it the dead man speaking to himself? Is it the survivor speaking to himself and imagining what the dead man is saying? It's up to you. As with many poems that are untitled originally, the first line of the poem is used as a placeholder for the poem. So it's called Is My Team Ploughing, and the lack of capitalization suggests that Houseman didn't in fact title this poem, but rather the first line of the poem has been substituted as the title. Common. So what we have here is a conversation between two people, the dead man and the man who, well, let's start with literal. I think on the literal level, we have two friends, one of whom is dead, and the other who has lived on, but not only lived on, he has married the dead man's sweetheart, and now lives in that man's house, sleeps in his bed, and plows his fields. So it very well could be the dead man kind of saying, hey, what's it like living my life? And in that sense, I would say the tone is one of envy and bitterness. On the other hand, it could be the living person who feels a certain guilt for having stepped into the shoes of his dead friend. Either way, I think the persistent theme here is that life goes on, even when you're not in it. And that's a hard lesson, but it's true. He starts gentle. He asks, hey, is my team plowing? You know, the oxen, are they still doing their thing? He says, yeah, no problem. People still playing football? Sure, still are. Life goes on, man. What about my girl? Is she happy? Has she gotten tired of weeping as she lies down at night? And the guy responds, oh yeah, she lies down lightly. She doesn't go to sleep. She's very well contented, which is kind of a rude thing to say to the dead guy. But again, it's true, right? She probably mourned her boyfriend's loss, but then what? You know? Are we bad people because we go on and continue our lives? I think from the perspective of the dead person, yes, we definitely are, but life goes on for the living, doesn't it? Your girl is well contented. Be still, my lad, and sleep. And now he's saying, hey, don't ask too many questions because you're not going to like the answer. And then his final question, the dead man says, what about you, my friend? Now that I'm thin and pine, have you found a better bed to sleep in than mine? And the guy, you know, what's he going to say? Yeah, actually, I lie easy. I lie as lads would choose. I cheer a dead man's sweetheart, never ask me whose, because it's yours. Yeah. So the takeaway from this is life goes on, even when yours doesn't. Okay. Hey, looking forward to seeing you guys soon so we can have more discussions about sex and death and poetry. Okay, take care. Sorry this was so long.